This is Syed Sajalis, and this brief session is going to be specifically for Chapter 2 of the Legal System and Methods. Um, we are starting off from Chapter 2 and not from Chapter 1 because this we are going to be discussing all the um, material information that we are expecting to see in the examination for the subject. So let's just dive right into it. So the second chapter is basically very basic. It talks about the different sources of law, how they operate. It briefly touches the concept of judicial precedent, so parliamentary sovereignty. But if we do not understand that at this point in time, it's okay because we have specific subjects that are addressing these only doctrines and principles. So let's talk about the different sources of law as of now. The first source of law is the law that is made by Parliament. Parliament enacts statutes. Parliament makes legislation. Parliament comes up with acts of Parliament. So the authority in the legal system, which is solely supposed to make the legislation, create, repeal, or amend the legislation, is the legislature, and the legislature is ultimately the parliament. So one of the sources of law is the parliament, and this source of law is the highest in authority. That's the first thing. Secondly, the law that is decided in the courts. That is the other source. The second source of law after parliament is the law that is made in the courts. By law that is made in the courts, we do not specifically mean that it is the duty of the courts to make law. The duty of the courts is to interpret the law. However, sometimes the parliament gives certain discretionary powers to the court, in which the courts can determine by the facts that they get to make law with their discretion. The law that the judges make is always in line with the parliamentary statutes, the legislation that is made by the parliament. However, another source of law, for the purposes of the English sources of law, is the judge-made law. It is also known as the case law as well as the common law. So that's the second source of law. The third source of law for UK is the European Union law. Why is this a source of law for UK? Because UK was once a part of the European Union. After Brexit, which happened very recently, and in 2020 December, UK completely exited the European Union. It is not a part of European Union anymore. However, there are still European Union laws that are applicable in UK. There is a difference that has occurred after since the UK has exited EU. We will talk about it right now. So European Union law basically is the law that was enacted by the parliament, that was ratified by the parliament when it became a signatory, when it became a member state of the European Union. EU law has its own laws. UK has its own. Every member state has its national laws. Then it has the laws that are existing domestically through the virtue of being a part of the European Union. Since we're talking about UK specifically, we will keep our lecture to that only. So European Union law sometimes can be contradictory with the UK codes. One of the statutes that was in contradiction was, for example, the Merchant Shipping Act of the year 1988, if I'm not wrong. Under this, there was only the British fishermen were allowed to fish in the British seas, territorial seas. However, the one of the principles of the European Union states that have all the citizens of the member states have the right to move anywhere in the European Union. They can work anywhere in the European Union, reside anywhere in the European Union. They can conduct business anywhere in the European Union, and there cannot be any discrimination with the member states or the citizens of the member states whatsoever. So the Merchant Shipping Act of the UK was basically going against the idea of the free movement of persons, which was the principle in the European Union law. So when the two became contradictory, the European Union law prevailed after a long procedure, and the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is responsible to implement and enforce the European Union law on the member states, decided that whenever the parliamentary law of the UK and the European Union law come into contradiction, the European Union law is going to prevail. This undermined the very principle of parliamentary sovereignty of the UK's legislation, UK's legal system. Um, However, since EU is not a part of UK is not a part of EU anymore, it is important for us to note down that the prevalence of European Union law over the parliamentary law is not the case anymore. It is now the it is now the discretion of the Parliament of the of the UK. It is now the discretion of the Parliament of the UK to decide whether they want to enact any European Union law, whether they want to repeal any European Union law, or they want to amend any European Union law. Again, because the UK exited due to after Brexit, exited European Union law, it is the Parliament has become supreme again. None other source of law supersedes or becomes prevalent over Parliament. UK can choose to enact any of the EU law, however, it can repeal, amend, or do anything about it. EU or the Chief of Court of Justice of the European Union cannot do anything to enforce the European Union law in the UK. The last source of law is the European Convention on Human Rights. European Convention of Human Rights is basically not at all. It is worth mentioning. ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights, is not a part of the European Union law. There are 28 member states in the EU. European Convention on Human Rights has 47 member states, which means it does not have anything to do with the European Union law. European Union law is a different area of law. European Convention on Human Rights is very different. European Convention on Human Rights is governed, ECHR is governed and regulated and interpreted and enforced on the member states through the um, European Court of Human Rights. On the other hand, European Union law is enforced by Court of Justice of the European Union. Since European Union law does not have a binding force over the UK anymore, it does not have any impact on the European Convention of Human Rights. European Convention on Human Rights is completely different in itself. What does it do? It protects the fundamental human rights. There are different um, acts that come into play under the European Convention on Human Rights. For example, the Human Rights Act 1998. Different fundamental rights are protected under this. For example, the right to life, right to protection from torture, right to assembly, a right to association, right to private or family life, and stuff like that. There are different human rights that are protected under Human Rights Act and the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, some of these rights are absolute, which means they are inalienable. Parliament or the governments of the member states who are signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights cannot go against these fundamental human rights because they are absolute in nature, such as right to life. You cannot kill someone no matter what, even if they are a terrorist, even if they are a sexual offender, whatever the case may be. A government is not entitled, does not have any authority to take someone's life. There are some other absolute rights that are given under the European Convention of Human Rights. For example, Article 4, which talks about the prohibition of slavery and forced labor. While there are some absolute human rights, there are some derogatory human rights. On the other hand, derogation means some these rights the government has the authority to derogate from these rights. It can infringe some of these fundamental human rights which are not considered absolute. Um, this is subject to the concept of margin of appreciation. The European Court of Human Rights assesses whether or not a specific derogation is lawful or unlawful with the concept of proportionality and necessity. Concept of proportionality means that when a government derogates from a fundamental human rights, it must be proportionate. It must be for a good reason, genuine reason behind it. The derogation, the derogation must be the only reason, the only way. Derogation must be the only way to protect the interest that the parliament or the government of the state is trying to protect. This is the idea behind proportionality. Proportionality is a pretty detailed concept. It is not a part of the subject in detail. However, you guys should have a overview, have a good grip over the overview of the same. Then we talked about the operation of the Human Rights Act. There are certain sections that give the courts the authority to read in to the parliamentary legislation. So, for the purposes of making sure that the domestic law legislation that is made by the parliament is in line and in accordance with the European Convention of the Human Rights, Section 3. Section 4 gives the courts the right to declare a legislation incompatible, domestic legislation incompatible from the conventional European Convention of Human Rights if it is in contradiction to the European Convention of Human Rights. However, this does not mean that the declaration of incompatibility does not mean that that specific legislation has been changed or repealed or is not in force anymore, because Parliament is still sovereign. It is still in power to decide whether or not it wants to amend, change, or repeal the legislation that has been declared incompatible. There have been attempts to change the Human Rights Act 1998 for the purposes of upholding parliamentary sovereignty by different parties, such as the Conservative Party, which has tried to make a couple of attempts to change or amend or repeal Human Rights Act, but because these protect fundamental human rights, there have been backlashes from other political parties. There have been backlashes from leaders, lawyers, media, and the people themselves, because the Human Rights Act protects the fundamental human rights, and obviously repealing them would mean a lot of backlash. Then the chapter briefly talks about the differences between English legal system, which is a common law legal system, and the civil law system, which, for example, is used in France. So it talked about how the two are different, where is um, uh, one has a codified constitution like France. UK does not have one. It talks about the pros and the cons of the same. We have talked about it in chapter 1, so we won't go into a lot of detail in this. Finally, we talked about the international law. There are two types: private and public. Private international law deals with the matters of that are between private individuals. Individuals or also include artificial humans, for example, companies. However, these are limited and restricted to international matters. At the same time, public international law, again, it is limited and restricted to international matters, but over here it is between the states. It deals with matters that are between the states. For example, states are not allowed to use nuclear weapon. That's an international law. However, that's implemented on the state for one state on another. That's in the that falls under the scope of public international law. Then we talked about how the parliament has to enact, ratify, or ratification of the international law or a treaty, so that the international law can become a part of the domestic UK's law. If the parliament does not enact or ratifies the international law, that would not be considered domestic law, and it would not have any legal effect in the English legal courts. Then we talked about how there is a law commission and other ad hoc committees, for example, Wolf Review, as well as the Legat Review of tribunals. These reviews, such as law commission and other committees, are responsible to shed lights on different um, controversial matters, different aspects of law, different areas of law which need changes because of the evolving society, which need changes because of any social reason, economic reasons, uh, whatsoever. So basically, law commission is one of the very prominent bodies which is completely independent from the government, and it issues proposals, and it recommends recommendations for changes of law to the parliament, and the parliament is entitled to consider it and respond to it within a year. And That's all about it. Yeah. However, law commission has been subject to criticisms because it can only recommend. It does not have any authority. The final discretion lies with the parliament to decide whether or not it wants to make any changes, repeal any law or anything. And the second reason for subject of criticism is that the procedure of recommendation, providing final recommendations to the parliament by the law commission, is pretty long. It's so long that sometimes by the time that it recommends a set of proposals to the parliament, the very area of law that it is addressing has been evolved, and those recommendations become obsolete because of the rapidly evolving society we live in, especially due to globalization, digitization, and other aspects of the same sort. Thank you very much, guys. Very briefly, we would have um, one of such videos uploaded on the Google Classroom for every topic that we do. If I'm not there and you guys want to revise and there's something that is unclear, you guys can check this video out. However, these videos will be brief and they won't be as detailed because they are supposed to be just a quick revision. Thank you. See you guys soon.